The iron glinted in the morning sun, but it wasn't the blade of a gladius or the head of a Roman pilum. It was the bronze-studded collar of a beast. A dog, massive and silent, standing at the edge of a battlefield like a shadow of death. The men of the 12th Legion called them canes pugnaces, war dogs. Not pets, not companions, but weapons. Long before drones, guns, or steel battalions, Rome unleashed something far more primal on its enemies. An animal born from discipline and rage, trained for blood and bred for war. In an age when legions marched by the thousands and entire cities burned under the boot of imperial conquest, there existed a force that moved not in formation, but with teeth, muscle, and fury. But where did this idea come from? And how did one breed of dog become a weapon so feared that entire enemy battalions broke ranks at their approach? To understand that, we must return to the early centuries of Roman expansion. Before the emperors, before the Colosseum, when Rome was just one city, fighting to become the only city that mattered. Back then, the world was a mosaic of tribes and territories, from the hills of Samnium to the deep forests of Gaul, and it was in these tribal lands, especially in the region now known as Molossia, an area spanning modern-day Albania and Epirus, that Rome first encountered the beast that would change its battlefield forever: the Molossian hound. This breed was unlike anything Rome had seen. Massive in size, often outweighing grown men, these dogs had jaws strong enough to break bones and a temperament hardened by centuries of guarding livestock from wolves and men alike. To the Romans, they were both terrifying and perfect. Rome took the Molossian and did what Rome always did. They refined it, trained it, weaponized it. Soon, every Roman general worth his laurel crown knew of the war dog corps, not as a novelty, but as an asset. The year was 52 BC. Julius Caesar was deep in Gaul, facing off against one of his fiercest rivals, Vercingetorix, the chieftain of the Arverni, who had managed to unite the fractured Gallic tribes into a singular resistance. The Battle of Gergovia had been a bloody reminder that the Gauls would not go quietly. But it was at the Siege of Alesia that Rome's war dogs earned their infamy. Caesar's forces were outnumbered, surrounded by a massive Gallic relief force on the outside and Vercingetorix's army on the inside. He constructed 2 rings of fortification, one facing out, the other in. The legions dug in, but morale was cracking. Food was scarce, night raids from the Gauls were relentless, so Caesar deployed the dogs. Under the cover of darkness, handlers released dozens of Molossian war dogs beyond the outer ring. These weren't unthinking beasts, they were trained to kill on command, to track scent, to hunt in silence until they lunged with terrifying speed. Accounts from Caesar's scribes, though sanitized, speak of dismembered scouts, gutted messengers, and Gallic warriors who fled at the mere howl echoing through the misty woods. One Gallic survivor, captured weeks later, told of a night where the forest growled and death ran on 4 legs. His companions, he said, didn't fall from spears, but were dragged screaming into the shadows by creatures too fast for arrows and too silent for prayers. The dogs became part of Rome's psychological warfare. They didn't just kill, they broke the enemy before the fight even began. It wasn't just Gaul. In Britannia, the dogs were used to flush rebels from caves. In Dacia, they guarded supply lines and tore through ambushes with a speed no human counter could match. In Judea, they were stationed at night to suppress uprisings by fear alone. But it was in Germania, Rome's most brutal frontier, where the war dogs truly became legend. There, dense forests cloaked the enemy, and terrain defied Rome's structured formations. In 9 AD, after the catastrophic ambush at the Teutoburg forest, where 3 entire Roman legions were annihilated, commanders began embedding war dogs in patrols, not just as scouts, but as shields. One story, passed down by the few survivors of a later skirmish in the Black Forest, tells of a dog named Brutus, a black-furred monster said to have stood nearly to a man's shoulder. When his unit was ambushed by Germanic warriors, Brutus didn't wait for orders. He charged, tearing into enemy lines, giving the surviving soldiers just enough time to regroup and push back. He died on the battlefield, pierced by spears, but they say over a dozen enemies fell before he did. The legions buried him like a soldier. They fashioned a crude helmet and left it by his grave. In Rome, a sculpture was carved in his honor and placed near the Campus Martius. Not all dogs were given names, most weren't. But all were trained with a discipline that mirrored the legions they marched with. They learned to ignore pain, to attack only on command, to bite and hold until told otherwise. Their handlers, often soldiers themselves, formed unbreakable bonds. A soldier might eat dry bread and sour wine, but the war dog at his side ate meat and was washed before battle. Rome valued its weapons. But these dogs weren't just tools. They inspired fear in the enemy, but also courage in Roman ranks. During the Parthian campaign, a young auxiliary named Tiberius wrote in a letter, "I cannot see my brothers, but I see Maximus, our dog, rushing across the sands, and I remember what it is to fight." When the dogs fell, soldiers wept. Some refused to replace them. Others carried tokens, collars, fur, teeth into their next campaign. Because in war, where the gods seemed distant and death so close, loyalty mattered more than strategy. And no creature embodied loyalty like the Roman war dog.
As the empire expanded, so did the role of war dogs. In the Flavian era, they were stationed at border outposts. Under Hadrian, they guarded the Great Wall. And even in Rome itself, elite units of dogs patrolled the streets during times of unrest. But as centuries passed, something shifted. The breed Rome had shaped for war began to fade. With the slow decline of the legions, the standardization of warfare changed. Siege engines replaced surprise attacks. Strategy replaced savagery. The Molossian war dog, once Rome's fang in the throat of rebellion, was no longer deemed essential. By the 4th century AD, mentions of them in military records grow sparse. Some were kept as guards. Others, bred with local dogs, lost their pure bloodline. Eventually, the Molossian disappeared, not in battle, but in silence. And yet, its legacy lives on. Modern mastiffs, bulldogs, and even some shepherd breeds trace their lineage to those ancient warriors. Their size, their strength, it's not coincidence, it's inheritance. A bloodline that remembers. Rome built its empire on discipline, power, and fear. The war dog embodied all three. It didn't question, it didn't betray. It charged when ordered, bled without hesitation, and died without complaint. Historians remember the generals, the statues show the emperors. But in the margins of history, in the mud and blood of the battlefield, there ran another kind of soldier. One with 4 legs, one with no name. But make no mistake, Rome's enemies remembered them. And even today, when a dog growls low in the dark, some distant echo of a Roman battlefield stirs, reminding us that not all warriors walked upright, and not all heroes spoke Latin. He had no shield, no voice, no glory, but he fought. And in that, he was more Roman than most. So, if you hunger for more untold battles, forgotten heroes, and the blood-soaked legacy of Rome, subscribe now. The Empire remembers those who listen.